And we're live. I'm Ari Temkin, and this is Phantom, where we are putting you at the center of the Dallas sports discussion. And we have some breaking news. The Cowboys have announced a coaching staff change. This on the first day of the bye week, after the Cowboys don't play or are idle this week. So basically the second week of the bye week, the Cowboys have decided to relieve offensive line coach Paul Alexander of his duties. The Cowboys, about 10 minutes ago, releasing a statement through their PR department. Again, the Cowboys have announced that offensive line coach Paul Alexander is out. Mark Colombo, longtime offensive lineman for the Dallas Cowboys, a former first-round pick at offensive line, will now serve as the offensive line coach. He has been the assistant offensive line coach. He now moves over to becoming the line coach. In addition, and I want to read this verbatim, the club also announced the hiring of longtime NFL and Dallas Cowboys offensive line coach Hudson Houck, who will work with Colombo and the offensive staff in an advisory capacity. So again, Paul Alexander is out. Mark Colombo and Hudson Houck are in. I think there were some indications that the Cowboys would probably make this move. Corey Miller, Corey Miller, Corey Miller says, I had a feeling this was coming. Yeah, I think the biggest surprise was that it happened today and not maybe a week ago after the game, giving them 2 weeks to get acclimated with Mark Colombo. Perhaps they were feeling that they wanted to, maybe Hudson Houck, and that's what my buddy Patrick Kahn, who I host the Cowboys Beat podcast with, Patrick Kahn suggested to me maybe they were waiting for Hudson Houck to make that final determination on whether or not he was willing to come back. He retired back in 2011 when the Cowboys decided to hire Bill Callahan to be their offensive line coach in 2012. Obviously, they then brought in after Bill Callahan another offensive line coach. So this Paul Alexander was in his first year as the new head offensive line coach for the Cowboys. And the offensive line has clearly regressed in the 7 games that he's coached. Barry Carter says, good move. Everybody hit the share button, and I'll take your comments or your questions on this. But again, breaking news, the Cowboys have decided to let go Paul Alexander as their offensive line coach. Mark Colombo, the assistant offensive line coach and former offensive lineman for the Dallas Cowboys, is now their offensive line coach in conjunction with Hudson Houck. We don't know exactly how that will work. My guess is that Mark Colombo is the offensive line coach and Hudson Houck then becomes the offensive line assistant. And then also in some capacity, some advisory capacity. Here's a statement from Jason Garrett. Again, this coming from the press release, which was just set out about 10 minutes ago. Quote, while approaching the midpoint of the season and going through an overall evaluation of our entire organization operation during the bye week, we felt that this move would serve the best interests of our team moving forward. We have great respect and admiration for Paul and what he's accomplished in a very successful career in the NFL. These are not easy decisions to make at any time of the year, but we will move ahead with the utmost confidence in what Mark Colombo and Hudson Houck will bring to our team in their new roles. So again, the Dallas Cowboys have decided to cut bait with Paul Alexander, who has been a long-time offensive line coach, but is just in his first season as the offensive line coach of the Dallas Cowboys. And Ninja Nuts asking who takes over. Well, that would be Mark Colombo and Hudson Houck, which again is a name probably familiar to many Cowboys fans. Hudson Houck was the longtime offensive line coach of the Cowboys. He retired after 2011. Bill Callahan then came in to be the offensive line coach. And since then, Hudson Houck has been retired. But obviously, a need for the Cowboys to have some experience. Maybe they didn't feel totally confident in Mark Colombo, that he would, he'd be available to do as best of a job as he could have. So perhaps that's why, that's why they decide to make this move right now. Zach Rosenberg says, did he go to the World Series game? It's a good question, and it's funny that we've spent, we basically spent an hour today talking about why Jason Garrett going to the World Series game was a bad move for him, and yet, let me just share this real quick. Everybody else do the same thing. Hit the share button if you wouldn't mind. Let's see here. Just trying to share this as many places as I possibly can. But yeah, it's kind of funny that Aaron Luciano says hello. Hello, Aaron Luciano on YouTube. Stevie Max says good news. Now just get rid of Linehan and Kellen Moore. But again, it's kind of funny that Garrett, you would imagine the decision to fire Paul Alexander had already been made. Then he goes off to California to watch the World Series game. Again, the optics of it don't look great. But then even before he can get back in Dallas, it looks like the decision's been made for the Cowboys to go ahead and relieve Paul Alexander of his duties. But the bottom line here, and this is probably the most important thing, as I am sorry, but I'm trying to post this as many places as possible. Corey Miller says, excited to see if these changes during the bye week will have visible difference next week. Joe Tranchina says, hello, everybody. Brian Walker says, what's going on? Again, I'm Ari Temkin from 105.3 The Fan as part of the Cowboys pre- and post-game show. And, of course, you can always catch me streaming live right here every single day, 12 o'clock on Showtime. But then when there's breaking news, I jump on and we talk about the breaking news. That's what makes this show on Phantom the most interactive Cowboys show out there. We are reacting with you to the breaking news as it happens, even if it's outside of the purview of my show, which is at 12 o'clock noon. Neil Favre says, hopefully Colombo realizes that this line is a powerful blocking unit, unlike Alexander. Yeah, the talk really throughout Cowboys Nation and certainly on 105 through the Fan, as we've been talking about it, is that Paul Alexander has come in and has changed some of the technique of what these offensive linemen have been doing, which sounds ridiculous. You have one of the best offensive lines in football, so why would you change technique as a new head coach, as a new offensive line coach? You think you would just continue with what they've been doing and think that that could be as successful. So again, the Cowboys make this decision. They've moved on from Paul Alexander. It's a good move because, especially if he was in fact changing around the schematics of what they were doing as an offensive line. I don't understand why anybody would do that, but if that was the move, then that's the right move for the Cowboys to then go with a guy like Mark Colombo, who's been there. He's been an offensive assistant for quite some time. He's been within this organization for quite some time. So it was a good thing for them to go ahead and make the move, bring in Colombo. The only thing I could think of is they were maybe a little bit worried about his lack of experience, and that's why they bring back Hudson Houck, maybe to be an assistant to Mark Colombo. Again, probably the reason they make this move when they make it, as opposed to making it last week. They probably do that in order to make sure that Hudson Houck was willing to come back. He retired in 2011, so he spent all this time retired. Now he rejoins the Cowboys staff as an offensive assistant. But clearly, though, it's a corresponding move, and clearly they feel more comfortable relieving Paul Alexander of his duties, bringing Mark Colombo into the fold as the offensive line coach, and then Hudson Houck as a sounding board for him. Rusty Grace on the house, along with Matt Robinson. What's up, Matt Robinson? How are you, buddy? Brajesh Patel watching. Again, your thoughts, your comments. I will try to get through as many as I can throughout the next few minutes, but as this news breaks, just want to get everybody's reaction to it. Again, Paul Alexander out as the head coach of, or rather, Paul Alexander out as the offensive line coach of the Dallas Cowboys. Mark Colombo in. Mark Colombo has been the assistant offensive line coach. They've also, again, brought back Hudson Houck, longtime Cowboys offensive line coach, to be, as they said in their press release, a sounding board. Sorry, that's not what was said in the press release. In the press release, it says, the Dallas Cowboys announced the release of offensive line coach Paul Alexander today. Mark Colombo, who has served as the team's assistant offensive line coach since 2016, will move into the position of offensive line coach for the team. In addition, the club also announced the hiring of longtime NFL and Dallas Cowboys offensive line coach Hudson Houck, who will work with Colombo and the offensive staff in an advisory capacity. Neil Favre says Freudian slip, Ari. Yes, that's correct. They fired their head coach. Thomas Carpenter says Jerry knows what he has to do, but he won't do it, which is what? Fire Jason Garrett? Well, he could, and he might, and that's probably after the season. Look, I'm not a big Jason Garrett fan. I don't think he's a very good head coach. I would not fire him at this point right now. I would wait until the offseason to do it, especially because I think this team is competing within a bad division. I still think, even though they're 5-2, that the Eagles or Cowboys will win this division over the Redskins, who I know, again, are 5-2, but I still believe that it'll be one of those two teams. So they make the trade for Amari Cooper, and they probably make the next move that everybody expected or wanted them to make, which was firing Paul Alexander literally 7 games into his tenure as the offensive line coach of the Dallas Cowboys. Let's see here. Zach Rosenberg says, is the water boy next? When will they make the real necessary changes? Steve Eason says, good. It's a start. Freddie Flash says, is Garrett next? Robert Anchetta Ninja Nut says, Zach, this was a very necessary move, and I agree. Aaron Luciano says, good move by the Cowboys. Again, I agree. I kind of thought it was ridiculous that a new offensive line coach would come in and change technique, but that had been sort of the MO of what everybody was saying. Well, Paul Alexander came in here and he was changing the technique. They had a new technique. Again, it sounded ridiculous because why would a new coach come in here as a veteran and decide to change technique for a group that has had pretty good technique over the course of their careers? This is one of the best offensive lines in football. So why would a new coach come in and change technique? It makes no sense whatsoever. But apparently that is what happened. Lyle Collins has been bad. Probably his worst season of his career at right tackle. Tyron Smith, easily the worst season of his career at left tackle. Certainly not seeing the development of Connor Williams, especially the Redskins game. That was easily his worst game as a offensive lineman in the NFL. So it's a move that makes sense, especially in line with the other coaches they brought on board. So again, not surprised they make this move. The only surprise for me that they make this move was because it took as long as it took. You would have thought they would have gone right away with it. But as my partner over at the Cowboys beat, Patrick Kahn, said and suggested, perhaps they were waiting for Hudson Houck to make his ultimate decision on whether or not he was willing to come back. And when he went ahead and said it was okay, they made the move. Jason Wills says, hey Jason Wills, how are you? Eric Doxson says, duh, right? Yeah, pretty much. Carol Christensen says, if they're one of the best, why do they lose? Thomas Carpenter says, what's good, brother? I'm good. How are you, man? Well, if they're one of the best, and why do they lose? Some would pin it on Paul Alexander as the offensive line coach. Again, for changing technique. What I've heard, and I've talked to a lot of people, and it's like, changing technique? Like, what does that even mean? Why would somebody do that? It seems ridiculous to change the technique of proven quality players at this level. Well, the people that I talked to were talking specifically about technique when it comes to hands and how they use their hands. That maybe Paul Alexander felt like this was a better technique for them to use. And again, 7 weeks in, the Cowboys feel like it was not a good move, and that's why they went ahead and made this decision, made this change to fire Paul Alexander as their offensive line coach. Mark Colombo, who's been on the staff since 2016, he now takes over, and Hudson Houck returns as perhaps a sounding board for Mark Colombo, and again, that's why they make this move. Robert Anthony says, fire Kellen Moore next. I would be surprised. Here's my feeling on this. This will be the last move the Cowboys will make until the offseason, unless they're at a point in time where they're out of it, where they're out of the race and they're not playing for anything. At that point, they could fire Jason Garrett. They could fire Scott Linehan. But I don't know that we'll see any other moves after this one. I could be wrong. Although I would have, my thought on this was after they lost to Washington to head into the bye, I would have thought this would have been the only move that they would have made during this bye period. It seemed like the one move that made the most sense, given that everybody keeps talking about the technique change that this offensive staff has undergone, or rather the offensive line has undergone. And Eric Doxson says, makes sense. How coached Colombo back in the day. And here's the other thing, too. It's worth pointing out. Mark Colombo was a bust as a first-round pick for the Bears by the time he got to the Cowboys. He was a first-round pick for the Bears, was released after 3 or 4 seasons with the team as a first-round pick, was picked up off the scrap heap by the Cowboys, and became a really productive offensive lineman under the tutelage of Hudson Houck. I don't know why they fired Hudson Houck, but he retired in 2011, I think because they wanted to bring on Bill Callahan because they thought he was an upgrade, and he probably was. And then obviously they go away from, they bring in other offensive line coaches who I guess didn't change much from Callahan. It does, however, look like Paul Alexander did decide to change significantly from Callahan. And I'll say this, Paul Alexander seemed to be a Scott Linehan guy. So is the rest of the offensive staff. They're all Scott Linehan guys. So we're starting to see where the Cowboys gave all of this power to Scott Linehan this offseason. And that's what sort of drove where they were going and the moves they made this offseason. Well, it's obvious now they're starting to sort of go back at some of those decisions. So to the point that somebody made earlier, perhaps this could notate that Kellen Moore could be next, with Dak Prescott seemingly regressing and Kellen Moore being the quarterback's coach tasked with allowing Dak Prescott the opportunity to continue to succeed. Let's see here. Anthony Haley says he agrees with firing Kellen Moore. Tyler Blue says all these horrible coaching hires. Garrett is still here. I mean, that's a great point. It's like this team continually reshuffles the deck when it comes to their offensive coaching staff, and yet the one guy who you'd think would be responsible for that isn't really shouldering the responsibility for that. But again, I'm under the belief that if the Cowboys don't make the playoffs, all of your wishes will be met. Jason Garrett will be fired as the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. In my opinion, based on nothing that I know, but it's just my opinion, I believe that the Cowboys will fire Garrett if they don't make the playoffs. All right, real quickly, just to try to get around to some final comments here on the breaking news. Again, breaking news, this just in. The Dallas Cowboys have fired offensive line coach Paul Alexander. They've replaced him with Mark Colombo, who's been on the staff since 2016, and Hudson Houck, who retired in 2011, but was a longtime offensive line coach in the NFL, longtime offensive line coach for the Dallas Cowboys. Anthony Haley says, what was the record for the boys in 2010-2011? Ian Goldberg says, but Linehan needs to be next, and then Garrett, another scapegoat in Alexander. Agreed there. And I don't really care so long as Jason Garrett inevitably gets the hook, and I'm not, consciously calling for Garrett's job, but I kind of am. I also thought it was kind of funny earlier this afternoon on the G-Bag Nation on 105 Through the Fan. Jeff Kavanaugh actually openly called for the Cowboys to fire Paul Alexander, and then literally minutes later, that happened. Aaron Luciano, Steve, I agree with you. Dak was pretty good when he was teaching Dak. I'm assuming you're talking about Mark Sanchez. He was the Cowboys' backup when Dak Prescott was a rookie. Romo, of course, was there, but Romo was rehabbing, wasn't really with the team, and then even when he came back, was trying to get his job back. So, Mark Sanchez is the guy the Cowboys went away from, and he was the guy that Dak Prescott most credits with his success his rookie season. Efren Moreno, how is Cooper doing? Does he look like a number one wide receiver? The answer to that is yes. Tyler Cutright says Fields a good move. Now let's see how Colombo does. And then Corey Miller says it's bad to hope we don't. Is it bad to hope we don't make the playoffs? Absolutely not. 100% not bad to hope that. I know a lot of Cowboys fans probably do. And I think some Cowboys fans have even adopted the idea of they're mad about the Cooper move simply because it gives them a better opportunity to make the playoffs and thus giving Jason Garrett the opportunity to continue keeping his job. And again, I just think it's that simple. You bring in Amari Cooper. You've now fired your offensive. Like the Cowboys are doing what they believe they can do in season to get this team to the playoffs. And nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, will get in the way of them firing Jason Garrett if this team doesn't get to the playoffs. That's it. That's what I think. Let's cut to the chase. The Cowboys traded for Amari Cooper. The Cowboys decided to go with a new offensive line coach because they wanted to make the moves that would take away any excuses at the end of this season for Jason Garrett not getting this team to the playoffs. And I guess you could argue that Jason Garrett was, in fact, working in Los Angeles. All right, I'm Ari Temkin. You can catch me each and every day right here on Phantom as part of Showtime. Showtime every day at noon, 12 p.m. Central. Some of you already know. I know Carol Christensen and Neil Favre, Ninja Nuts, G. Garcia, Tyler Cutright, Corey Miller. You all know. Dakota Stiegel, Ian Goldberg, you all know about Showtime at 12 o'clock Central right here on Phantom. But for those of you that are just checking this out for the first time, come on back tomorrow, 12 o'clock Central right here on Phantom. Phantom is putting you in the center of the Dallas sports discussion. But that's all I have for right now. Again, the Cowboys have fired Paul Alexander as their offensive line coach. They've replaced him with Mark Colombo and Hudson Houck, who retired in 2011 but is now back with the Cowboys. The comment from Jason Garrett is, quote, while approaching the midpoint of the season and going through an overall evaluation of our entire operation during the bye week, we felt that this move would serve the best interests of our team moving forward. We have great respect and admiration for Paul and what he's accomplished in a very successful career in the NFL. These are not easy decisions to make at any time of the year, but we'll move ahead with the utmost confidence in what Mark Colombo and Hudson Houck will bring to our team in their new roles. Again, probably the only reason why they waited as long as they did to make this move, and I mean by that a week later than they probably should have, was because they were probably waiting for Hudson Houck to make a decision. Again, I'm out, but thank you everybody for joining us. 12 o'clock Central tomorrow for more on this. Phantom, make sure to like the page, hit that subscribe button, and of course hit the like page over on YouTube. But for now, I'm out. Peace.